Have you ever met a man who said he wanted to take care of you? But deep down, were you the one who ended up taking care of him? He had beautiful words, promises of protection, eyes that said, "Trust me." But there was something broken there, something even he couldn't touch. Men who try to be shelter, but inside they are a storm. Men who offer love, but live in silent emotional ruins. How can someone heal if they bleed inside and pretend to be whole? Rumi wrote, "You have to keep breaking your heart until it opens." But what about when the heart was never whole to begin with? Maybe you're listening to this right now with a lump in your throat, because you have lived, or still live, with a man like that. Someone who promises you the world, but can barely sustain their own soul. He says he loves you, but it disappears when you need it. He cares, but leaves you to tend to his wounds. He wants to be present, but he is absent within himself. And you love so much that you try to fix what you didn't break. This is the invisible cycle, the silent wound that many women carry. Loving emotionally absent men, men who want to care, but have never been whole. Have you ever felt this? Who is holding the weight of a relationship on their shoulders? That needs to be strong, sensitive, stable, and loving. Why does he always have something unresolved? A pain that has never been healed, an absence that has never been named? Maybe you've never said it out loud, but she feels emotionally drained, exhausted from trying to be the support for someone who promised to lift you up, but it keeps falling apart inside. And the cruelest thing of all, it's just that he's not always a bad person. Sometimes he really wants to love you, but he can't, because he never found himself. He never healed the wounded boy he carried inside, never looked at the shattered soul that learned to feign strength while begging for care. He wants to care, but he never learned to heal himself. Rumi said, "Do not look outside yourself for what can only be found within." But many men are still out there, looking for in women the embrace that his own soul abandoned. And love turns into confusion. Care becomes a demand. The relationship becomes a repetition. You feel like you love for two, feel like you're screaming in the silence. Who cares, but is not cared for? That is given, but is not received. And maybe at some point, you started to believe that the problem is you, that loving too much is a mistake, that being sensitive is weakness, expecting emotional presence is asking too much. But what if I told you that this pattern isn't your fault? Does this pain have a name? And that there is a spiritual key hidden in this chaos? You are not alone. This story is more common than you think. And today, Rumi's soul will help you see what was hidden. Because what you feel, this exhaustion of loving incomplete men, this emptiness after giving so much, it's not the end. It is the beginning of an awakening. But before you continue, take a deep breath. This video is not just an explanation. It's a journey through pain, through distorted love, and for the silent healing that begins when you decide to stop saving those who have not yet wanted to find themselves. Comment here if you have ever experienced something like this, or if you're still trying to understand why you always end up loving broken men. I read everything, and each comment is a soul saying, "I felt it too." This may be the most important video you'll watch today, because he doesn't just bring you words, he gives you mirrors. Mirrors to see emotional patterns that you have been carrying silently for years. Understanding this content can be the first step to breaking cycles that have hurt your soul more than once. And if you feel this video can help other people, leave your like. This helps the content reach more souls who are also tired of giving themselves to the end. Subscribe to the channel. Here, each video is a whisper to the soul, a reminder that you don't have to keep repeating stories that empty you. Now, let's go deeper, because what you feel today, this confusion between love and abandonment, it's just the surface. What's behind this? It's an invisible problem, a silent knot that forms when men grow up without learning to feel. No room to cry, not allowed to be vulnerable. They grow up believing that caring is protecting, but they never learn to protect themselves from their own emptiness. And in this imbalance, the cycle of pain is born. Have you ever loved someone who tried to protect you but could barely stand up? Men who present themselves as shelter, but inside live in silent collapse. Men who offer support, but emotionally are always on the verge of breaking down. You look at him and see a caregiver, a protector, a companion, but little by little, he realizes that what he calls care is often just a reflection of the need he tries to disguise. It's subtle, sometimes unnoticeable at first. He's kind, caring, says he wants to make you happy. But over time you realize you're sinking into a strange kind of exhaustion, because he doesn't care with presence. He cares with dependence. He offers what he doesn't have, promises what he doesn't feel. And you, with all your sensitivity, try to fill this void that you didn't create. Rumi said that pain carries the invitation to transformation. But there are pains that hide so well that they go unnoticed even by those who carry them. This is the invisible problem. The pain that doesn't scream. The pain that was silenced in childhood, when this man learned that crying was weakness, that asking for help was a sign of defeat. That feeling afraid made him less of a man. So he grew up creating masks. He created a force that was just a facade, a self-control that is, in fact, repression, an image of security that crumbles in the silence of one's own room. And when he enters a relationship, he doesn't enter fully. He enters needy. Don't come in to offer, come in to suck. But he doesn't know that. And you didn't know either. Until you find yourself completely exhausted, trying to solve crises that aren't yours, tolerating emotional outbursts, escapes, silences, and all in the name of love. But was it love? Or was it a mirror of what you yourself believe you deserve? Because loving a man who is never whole is often also an unconscious attempt to heal something inside you, something that tells you that you need to be strong all the time. Who needs to prove that she is worthy of love, even when the other person has nothing to offer but their own pain? And here's the paradox. These men really believe they are caring. They say, "I just want to protect you." But what they do, without realizing it, is pull you into the hole where they still live emotionally trapped. They don't care with their hearts present. They take care of the wounded ego, with the fear of losing, with the desire for control, with the urgency to be validated. You feel like you are being cared for, but also watched. You feel protected, but also trapped, because there is no freedom when care comes from fear. There is no cure when affection is conditioned. And there is no surrender when the other's soul is still fragmented. And you start to realize that you're becoming someone you no longer recognize. He starts to walk on tiptoe, afraid to say something that might unsettle him, not asking, for fear of seeming demanding, silently canceling himself out, so as not to burden him further. And in the process, you disappear. Its essence is fading away. Its light molds itself to the size of its emptiness. This is what almost no one sees. The pain of loving someone who tries to give you security, but only gives you uncertainty. The exhaustion of holding a relationship together while it sinks into justifications. The frustration of expecting emotional maturity from someone who is still emotionally in their infancy. And worse, the guilt you carry for wanting to give up, because they taught you that love is patience, it is surrender, it is insistence, but they never told you that true love shouldn't hurt like this. The invisible problem is this: men who want to care but have never been whole, and women who accept this kind of love because they believe that with enough love, it can change. But here's a truth that might hurt to hear. You can't heal a man who still denies his own wounds. You can't be a bridge for someone who insists on living in isolation, and the care he claims to offer is often just his fear of losing you, disguising itself as protection. If this has ever happened to you, comment here. I once tried to hold a man who couldn't stand up. Your comment could be the beginning of another woman waking up, and it could be the beginning of your own liberation. You've come this far, listening to all this perhaps with your heart racing, feeling that each word describes a piece of your story. And what comes next isn't easy to hear, but it's necessary. Because when we begin to understand why these men act this way, why they say they want to care but can never sustain their own emotional world, what we discover goes far beyond behavior. It goes to the soul. Rumi said, "You are not trapped in the world, you are trapped in your mind." And that reveals much more than it seems. Most of the men you've loved or still love aren't truly present in the relationship, not because they don't care, but because they live trapped in invisible prisons, fueled by old beliefs, silent traumas, and unnamed absences. They were taught to be strong, but not to be whole. They were programmed to win, to protect, to dominate, but never to feel, to embrace, or simply to be. From a young age, they were told that vulnerability was weakness, that crying was a sign of defeat, that expressing their feelings made them less of a man. So what did they do? They learn to lock everything away. They learn to wear emotional armor so thick that even the purest love can barely penetrate it. And then, when they try to love someone, they offer what they believe is care, but which in reality is just a repetition of what they learned. Control, physical presence without depth, protection without emotional surrender. Do you see now? The root cause isn't a lack of love, it's a lack of self. They can't give themselves to each other because they don't even know who they are. And a man who doesn't know himself, who doesn't acknowledge his own wounds, who has never delved into his own soul, can't love without hurting. He may even try, but whenever the bond begins to demand emotional truth, he backs away, because it threatens everything he's learned to hide. Maybe you've experienced this. Moments when he seemed so present, so involved, and then suddenly he'd shut down. He'd disappear emotionally. He'd become cold, distant, uncommunicative, and you'd wonder, what happened? What did I do wrong? But the answer was never within you. It was within him. It was his soul saying, I can't handle this. I wasn't prepared for this depth. This is where we get to the spiritual root of the pain. The wound isn't just emotional, it's existential. Many of these men aren't just disconnected from their feelings. They're disconnected from their very essence. They live in a world of the mind, of control, of reason, of logic. They try to control everything because deep down, they're afraid to look within. They're afraid to feel what's there, because they feel that if they open that door, they won't be able to handle what they find. But it's precisely because they've never looked within that they continue to hurt those who come with love. And you who came with an open heart, intending to build something real, end up being hit by their inner turmoil. Because while you surrender, they protect themselves. While you feel, they rationalize. While you open your arms, they close your soul. Rumi said, you have to keep breaking your heart until it opens. But these men didn't let their hearts break. They buried it. They chose to hide behind a veneer of strength, rather than allow the pain to transform them. And so they keep repeating the same patterns. They run away when they're seen. They withdraw when love demands reciprocity. They disappear when the relationship demands emotional maturity. And this isn't malice. It's not coldness. It's fear. An ancient, ancestral fear passed down through generations of men who were never taught to live with an open heart. Men who learned to survive, but not to feel. Who were prepared for war, but not for love. And now when they try to build a relationship, they get lost in the maze of connecting with someone who feels deeply. Do you see how this creates a cycle? A cycle of women who deeply love men who don't know how to love back. Not because they don't want to, but because they haven't yet awakened. Because they still live far from their own soul. Because they confuse presence with control, love with possession, care with dependence. They're not ready, and perhaps they never will be, until they choose to break their armor and find themselves in the void. But until that happens, you're the one who suffers. You try to be a light in his chaos. You offer love and receive confusion. You seek connection and encounter resistance. You open your heart and are met with silence. You can't heal the absence he carries. You can't fill a man who still feels incomplete. Healing begins when he decides to stop running from himself. And you begin to free yourself when you understand that your mission was never to save him. If this text spoke to your soul, if any part of it seemed to describe exactly what you experienced or still experience, leave a comment below. I was once the port of those who were always shipwrecked. Maybe someone will read what you wrote and finally understand that they are no longer alone in this journey. You've come this far because something inside you knows. You know that loving can no longer be synonymous with getting lost, that caring for others cannot continue to be a disguise for self-abandonment. And it is now, at this point in the journey, that you need to hear what almost no one has told you. You cannot heal another by being their emotional crutch. No matter how well-intentioned your heart may be, no matter how much your soul longs to be a haven, a healing source, a comfort, the truth is that no one finds themselves by escaping their own emptiness. And often that's what ends up happening. You become the emotional excuse for them to continue denying what they need to face. You become the patch for the wound they refuse to look at. You become the bridge, but a bridge they don't cross. They just lean on it. And you, meanwhile, bend over. It adapts. It molds itself. Hold on. And he gradually loses himself in the attempt to keep it whole when he doesn't even know what it means to be whole. This is the secret most people don't see. Love, When born from the fear of abandonment, becomes a prison. When born from the pain of not being enough, it becomes sacrifice. When born from self-absorption, it becomes a cycle of self-sabotage. Have you ever stopped to think how many times you tried to be everything to him? Peace when he lived in war, the lap when it became absence, the voice that understood when he sank into silence. You tried with all your love to be healing. But healing, my dear, never comes from outside. It begins when the being itself decides to go through its darkness. You are not the light in his cave. You are the sun of your own journey. And as harsh as it may seem, loving a broken man doesn't make you whole. It just puts you, again, into the same cycle of emotional abandonment. This cycle where you give everything hoping that one day it will awaken. But awakening cannot be bought with sacrifice. Awakening is a choice. And if he hasn't chosen that yet, you need to have the courage to choose for yourself. Rumi said, "The wound is the place where the light enters." But light only comes in when we stop putting covers on the hole. And sometimes you've been that lid. Without realizing it, with the best of intentions, you put yourself in the place where he should have the courage to look. You stood between him and his own pain. You held on to the edges of his soul as if it were your duty to keep him standing. But this one-sided love, this constant caring, this saving without pause, this is not love. It's fear. It is emotional dependence disguised as affection. It's the addiction of thinking that your existence only has value when you are being useful to someone. And where does this addiction come from? Usually from a childhood where you had to grow up too quickly, where you learned that love came with effort, that being loved was the result of being good, of caring, of being responsible. So, loving broken men is often an unconscious repetition of your own story. You don't just want to love. You want inside yourself to be chosen as the one who finally deserves rest. But if you only feel alive when you're saving someone, you still don't understand that you didn't come into this world to carry anyone. True healing is not saving. It is to free. Free the other from the expectation that you will complete them. Free yourself from the illusion that if you give enough love, he will change. Free your heart from the guilt of not being able to be everything to someone who still doesn't know how to be anything to themselves. And this liberation is not an act of abandonment. It's an act of self-love. It's you saying, I choose to break out of this cycle. I choose to come back to myself. I choose to stop using care as a way to beg for crumbs of attention. Yes, it hurts. It hurts because you had hope. It hurts because you saw potential. It hurts because he said he loved you. But you need to start differentiating words from presence, delivery promises, connection caution. A man can tell you 1,000 times that he loves you, and yet never show up when your soul needs it most. The hidden key to breaking this cycle is not to persist until it changes. It's recognizing the exact moment when you need to let go. Release without guilt. Let go without martyring yourself. Let go without mutilating yourself inside. Because the love that requires you to destroy yourself to support someone else is not love. It's prison disguised as affection. You were not born to repeat the pain of those who created you. You were not born to serve as a foundation for men who refuse to grow. You were not born to be anyone's medicine. You were born to be whole. And wholeness is not built in relationships where only one side carries the weight. True love begins when you understand that you no longer have to bleed to be chosen. If you've read this far and feel like this describes you in some way, leave a comment. Write it like this: I release the weight that is not mine. Maybe, just maybe, this is the beginning of your return home. Maybe you've experienced this. Maybe you're still experiencing it. A relationship where he said he wanted to protect you, that he wanted to care for you, that he wanted to build something real. He looked into your eyes and talked about the future. He made plans. He told you you were special, that he'd never felt that way about anyone else. And for a while you believed him, because his words were charged with emotion, and you, with your soul open, wanted it so much to be real that you allowed yourself to trust. But slowly, you began to notice a gap. Something didn't fit. He spoke of love, but was absent. He said he loved you, but disconnected at the most important moments. When you needed him most, he disappeared. Not physically. Often he was there, but not there. Like you, the body present, but the soul distant. He gave himself in promises, long messages, vows, praise. But in practice, it was you who sustained everything. You built the bridge. You remembered the dates. You sparked the deepest conversations. You held him in his moments of crisis. You held him close when he fell apart, when the world seemed too heavy for him. But when it was your pain that overflowed, he fell silent. He withdrew. He changed the subject. He disappeared emotionally. And it hurt you, because a part of you couldn't understand. How could someone you claimed to love so much be absent just when you needed to be seen most? But the answer was there all along. It wasn't about you. It never was. It was about his emptiness, a void he tried to fill with affection, with control, with partial presence. He didn't really want to love you. He wanted to feel loved. He wanted to be validated, recognized, embraced by someone who would make him forget, even if only for a moment, how disconnected he was from himself. And you, with all your emotional generosity, offered yourself as that mirror. You saw in him the potential, the wounded soul, the boy who just needed a little more affection to blossom. And, out of love, you gave yourself. But what you received in return was a cycle where love seemed close, but never complete, where the bond was created but always with cracks, where the care he offered was in fact need in disguise, because he sought you out when he was in crisis. He said he needed you, but not because he saw you as a partner, but as support, as ground, as a bridge. And there's nothing wrong with being support as long as there's balance. But there was only imbalance. You found yourself giving more and more. First, small things, then your energy, your patience, your time, your ability to endure silence. Until one day, perhaps without realizing it, you gave parts of yourself, parts of your light, your voice, your truth, and all of this in the name of a love that, deep down, was never reciprocated, because it couldn't give you what you offered. It barely knew how to sustain its own pain. How could it sustain the love you gave? It happens a lot, maybe more than you imagine. Men who arrive with sweet words but in practice disappear. Men who seem to want to be present but can't break through their own shadows. Men who say, "I'm here," but live emotionally elsewhere. Men who relate to you as if you were the cure for their absence. And when you can't be that cure because it's impossible to be, they blame you, push you away, or simply disappear. And you, hurt, begin to wonder if it was too much, if you gave in too quickly, if you should have done things differently. But the truth is, the error wasn't yours. The root was imbalance, the illusion that love was enough, that caring for him would be enough, that giving your all was enough for him to finally realize how valuable you were. But this never had anything to do with value. It had to do with emotional availability, with spiritual readiness. And he wasn't ready. He was still in a pain he couldn't even name. And you, wanting to love, ended up being dragged into his emotional mess. Relationships like this start out intense, deep, full of promise. But they don't last, because they weren't built on wholeness. They were built on neediness, on fear of being alone, on wounds that haven't healed. And you've confused presence with surrender. You've confused intensity with depth. You've confused care with emotional dependence. And when that happens, pain is inevitable. Because loving someone like this is like trying to fill a leaky cup. You give, and still feel like something is always missing. What remains is existential fatigue, a feeling of having experienced something that seemed like love, but wasn't. And this realization is painful, because it forces you to face the fact that perhaps you betrayed yourself a little along the way, that you stopped listening to your intuition, that you ignored the signs, all because you believed love could heal someone who hadn't even begun to heal themselves. If any of this resonated with you, if any part of this example resonated with your story, leave a comment here. Write it like this: I gave too much of myself to those who didn't know how to receive me. Maybe this is more than just a rant. Maybe it's the beginning of a new cycle where you choose to no longer abandon yourself for love. There comes a time after so many unrequited gifts, so many absent presences, so many promises that fell apart in practice, that something inside you begins to awaken. At first, it's subtle, a restlessness, an uneasiness, a thought that arises in the middle of the night and whispers, what if I stop trying to be everything to him? What if I start being everything to myself? This is the shift in consciousness, a silent but profound breaking point. It's when your soul, tired of begging for scraps of affection, begins to remember who it is. You're not here to be anyone's cure. This needs to be repeated, even if it hurts, even if it challenges everything you've learned, even if it goes against what you've been taught about what it means to be good, strong, worthy of love. You weren't born to be an emotional patch. You weren't born to save men who refuse to dive into themselves. You are the cure for your own story. And when you understand this, something realigns. Not magically, not immediately, but like someone finding their bearings after so long spinning around someone else's pain. Rumi said, "Don't settle for stories of how things happen to others. Awaken your own legend." This legend isn't about living a perfect romance. It's not about finding someone who finally understands you. It's about becoming the person who stops betraying yourself in the name of loves that never knew how to see you. It's about looking at yourself with the same dedication you once gave to those who never knew what to do with their light. It's about returning home, the home that is you. You spent too much time trying to fit your soul into relationships that required you to diminish yourself. You spent too much energy trying to prove you deserved love, trying to decipher silences, trying to heal pains that weren't yours. But what now? Now you begin to understand that true love, the love that expands and doesn't corrode, the love that liberates and doesn't imprison, it only arises when there is wholeness, when there is real presence, when there is emotional truth. This is the turning point. When you stop asking why he didn't stay, and start asking yourself why you insisted so much. When you stop blaming yourself for not being enough, and start realizing that in fact, you were too much all along. When you start realizing that your worth isn't in your ability to endure, but in the courage to choose yourself. Because enduring isn't love, it's resistance, it's emotional survival. And you weren't born to simply survive. You were born to live with presence, with soul, with truth. There's a strength within you that may have been dormant for so long. The strength of those who decide to rise up, of those who choose to no longer accept emotional crumbs, of those who stop romanticizing relationships that only reproduce your oldest wounds. Because now you can see more clearly. You can tell when someone is using you as an anchor, not a partner. You can distinguish when the care is genuine, and when it's just disguised emotional manipulation. And most importantly, you start treating yourself differently. You start saying no. You start setting boundaries. You start choosing silence over arguments that only drain your energy. You start respecting your healing time. You start listening to yourself. You start embracing yourself. And you start realizing that your presence is enough, that your company is sacred, that your worth doesn't need to be proven, because you already are. You no longer need to sacrifice yourself to be loved. You no longer need to carry the pain of two. You no longer need to pretend everything is okay when something inside you screams that it isn't. True love begins when you understand that the other person doesn't need to be your healing project. When you understand that you're not responsible for the pain they don't want to face. When you choose to let go, not out of surrender, but out of self-love. For peace, for honoring your story. This shift isn't easy. It requires courage. It requires breaking patterns. It requires unlearning. It requires mourning what's been trapped for years. It requires embracing your own loneliness and transforming it into strength. But it's necessary, because until you place yourself at the center of your own life, you'll continue to revolve around other people's pain, emotional ghosts, loves that seem great, but are too small for the immensity of your soul. And when you awaken, you no longer accept less. You no longer kneel before absences. You no longer try to fill holes that aren't yours. You no longer get emotional with empty words. Because now you know yourself. Now you respect yourself. Now you remember who you are. If you felt this somewhere inside, comment below. I am my own cure. Write it down, declare it, remember it. This may be your first response to life with awakened consciousness. If you've made it this far, it's because your soul is already tired of relationships that only drain you. Because somehow, you recognize that you have already carried too much of what was not yours. And now, you begin to remember that there is a way back to yourself. Here on this channel, every word is a seed of healing, a mirror that reveals, a break in the chaos. If this touched you, if something awakened inside you, subscribe. This journey of awakening is just beginning, and you don't have to go through it alone. If this video gave you any truth, Leave your like as a way of honoring your own emotional journey. And it doesn't stop there. The video that's appearing on the screen now is the next step. Click on it. Your heart will understand why.